You've been dreaming of this since the day your father died. By Jupiter's beard. When will you finally understand it never was about you or your sad excuse for a family? I had plans. Great plans for Rome. The Republic is crumbling, but the establishment always hates the revolutionary. Your father was a spy, a tool of the state. He fought for the status quo. I was forced to eliminate him to save Rome. Maybe. What's clear is that somebody must take charge. The point was never becoming the king. It was that Rome needed a king in the first place. Someone who could cut through the endless dogshit coming out of the Senate. The blatant tribalism, the spiteful self-sabotage, the bribery and greed. We need someone who is willing and able to make difficult and unpopular decisions. If a decision is made for the right reasons, it can never be wrong. You think, of all the things a murderer might say to her victim, I agree. I didn't see it coming. Always thought you were a bit of a coward. Turns out I was wrong. It seems the Park I intended my role to be in molding the first Emperor of Rome. When I am dead, your reign will begin.
It's finally over. It almost seems unreal.
So am I. I hope the underworld has nice baths.
You have violated every single rule we set out to protect in the first place. You have killed Romans. Senators, even.
There's one thing you get to decide for yourself now.
We must submit ourselves to the judgment of the Senate, as we discussed. Only then can we begin to undo some of the damage we have caused.
Are you stupid? Did you hit your head in battle? We will all be killed.
Not all of us. She will probably be condemned to death indeed, but we will not be punished as harshly.
We should not get punished at all. We should take over Rome and live like kings.
The Anira is right. Surrender will only lead to execution.
But, Magister, surely morals dictate that she should surrender. Doing anything else would be immoral, and thus make her a lesser woman.
She's like my own child. She would be a lesser woman, but a woman who is alive.
They will not just let us go. We all attacked.
Well, I certainly do not want to be executed.
May I remind you what you have just said about the expected behavior of a moral individual?
I don't consider myself a particularly moral man yet.
I don't care about the philosophy of it. If you stay here, more people will die and the chaos will never end. We don't have to turn ourselves in if you're afraid of the consequences. I'm sure Cleopatra will protect you if you flee to Egypt.
That is still immoral, for you would be avoiding judgment. But I'd feel glad if that happens. Therefore, I am a lesser man. But I feel good about being one.
I will see you out of Rome safely, but I cannot follow. For the first time in my life, the city finally accepts me, thanks to you. Wale, my friend. It's been a fun ride.
It has been glorious.
I'll make the arrangements, Domina. But I was always free, child. I chose to serve you. Nothing can change my mind.
There are some who say it was a sudden change of heart that turned a would-be tyrant from her throne. Most accept the common story. A woman pushed to her limits by a corrupt and rigid system that would afford her no power through legitimate means. A republic on the brink of becoming an empire, vulnerable to the ambitions of unscrupulous men. A desperate, unlawful action that saved the republic and ushered in a new era of reform and progress. Although in one sense she never returned to Rome, in another, greater sense, she never left. Her actions had shaken the very foundations of society, giving the lie to the notion that women cannot aspire to the lofty heights that men can reach. It is said that she retired to a palatial estate in Egypt, overlooking the lush banks of the Nile. There she became a close and trusted advisor to Queen Cleopatra, under whose rule Egypt soon regained its independence from Rome and was reborn as a matriarchal nation. As his domina left Rome in exile, old Cinyros chose to stay behind. There was just enough time for the Servus to get the manumission he had been promised before he was left to his own devices. For a time, he stayed with Claudiana at her invitation, until he had earned enough denarii as a teacher of Greek to get a small place of his own. She had offered him money, but he had politely declined. Cinyros still had many powerful and influential friends in the city, and thanks to them, he enjoyed access to well-stocked libraries and well-educated conversation. Ultimately, what gave Cinyros peace was the knowledge that he had long since unburdened himself with the guilt of the mistakes of his youth. In his final days, he was able to return to Greece at last, and died there, satisfied. When his friends left Rome, Caeso stayed behind in the city to settle down with Lucia and their daughter. Though their relationship was distant at first, the shared love they felt for their daughter soon brought them close, and eventually they had more children together. To his surprise, Caeso took well to the quiet life and to fatherhood. And on the few occasions when he did feel that old lust for adventure bubble back to the surface, he would leave Rome for a time and visit his friends in exile, who were always glad to see him. Callida had stood by her companions through thick and thin, but now it was time for her to stand by herself. As they left Rome, she stayed behind and settled down in the city that had once rejected her. Now, for the first time ever, she felt at home there. Though many still looked askance at her for what they perceived as her unwomanly pursuits, she had learned to disregard their judgment, and she had plenty of friends in the city who now respected her for who she was and what she had achieved. Bestia returned to Africa to look for his sister again. Eventually, he did find her, and together they returned to Mauretania, where they settled down in an idyllic village and started new families of their own. In this new, quiet life, Bestia learned the true value of happiness. Deianira followed her friend into exile. Rome had never quite lived up to her expectations, and she was glad to leave it behind. Eventually, she returned to her homelands of Scythia, where she reconnected with her family, and she always remained in contact with her friends, visiting frequently with new stories and exotic spices from distant lands. Claudiana lived for many more years. She had many friends in Rome, and her life was peaceful and comfortable until her final days. On her deathbed, she revealed that she had once been very close indeed with Lucullus, and that indeed the true family name of her children was Licenia. Cato remained an important figure in Roman politics. Though he could not live with his wife, they stayed in touch through letters and his occasional visits. If their marriage was ever based in love, it soon became more of a formality, as his work in Rome and her distance to the city kept them apart. Cicero served one more year as consul before his retirement. In his old days, he lived a quiet life on a farm in Sicily, where he was greatly beloved by the people for his time as quaestor. He continued to write many books on politics and law. Defeated once more by Rome, Mithridates escaped to the lands north of the Black Sea in the hope that he could raise a new army, but the locals soon rebelled against his rule. Incapable of taking his own life by poison, in the end, Mithridates died by the sword of his bodyguard. With Zenobia in charge of Musia, it became once more a peaceful part of the Roman province of Asia Minor. With her focus on trade and strong ties to the neighboring regions, her people enjoyed a period of great prosperity. Without the leadership of Damianos, the rebellion of his gladiators soon spiraled out of control, beginning what became known as the Servile War. Escaped slaves terrorized the Roman citizens throughout Thracia until the wealthy senator Crassus brutally defeated them and crucified thousands along the road towards Rome. Lunia's death sent Nazarmanes spiraling into a fractious conflict as greedy elders from minor tribes attempted to fill the void her passing had left behind. Though Queen Cleopatra attempted to bring the region under control, her attentions were too divided, the conflict too great for her to manage. Rome was forced to send more legions to enforce peace and stability with an iron fist. Though Africa Proconsularis eventually saw peace again, the traditions and culture of the Berber population were lost forever. Queen Cleopatra Philopator was, from the day of her coronation, a greatly beloved Queen of Egypt. Revered and admired by the population, she spent many of her days traveling up and down the Nile to visit her subjects and address their troubles and concerns. Under her rule, Egypt remained a powerful and prosperous nation and a strong ally of Rome. The fruits of the Nile flowed freely to the people of the Republic. After traveling all across Africa for many years, going wherever her instincts took her, Rhea eventually returned to Memphis and to the service of Tener at the Temple of Ubasti. When her mentor passed away, Rhea naturally assumed the mantle as High Priestess of the Cat Goddess. Though the old faith was dwindling, she was greatly beloved by many, and her temple prospered, always home to many cats. With Diwytirchus once more assuming rulership of the Aedui, the tribe maintained a strong alliance with Rome, and through it, they greatly prospered. With the aid of the Aedui, Gallia slowly unified under Roman rule, and civilization soon began to creep into those lands in the form of paved roads, aqueducts, and fortified Roman towns. In his old age, did the Druid ever regret hastening the absorption and suppression of his own faith and culture? We will never know. The once proud and strong Arwerni were greatly reduced by the defeat of Vercingetorix, but his survival gave them hope. His will to make war upon Rome had been crushed, but he remained a strong figure of leadership among his people, even despite his failures. With his guidance, the tribes of Gallia remained unified and somewhat at peace, and vestiges of their culture and traditions survived their gradual subjugation under Rome. In this work, I have done my best to recount the history of this fascinating period, truthfully and accurately. As I have scoured the sources and spoken to many who claimed to have heard the story from someone who was there at the time, one thing that has stood out to me is the pivotal moments along the way where our story could have turned out very differently. Might our unusual subject have remained in Rome with her friends to influence its politics in the years to come? Certainly when Legio Victrix crossed the Rubicon, the only way to remain in Rome would have been as its emperor. But perhaps if a different decision had been made on that fateful bridge, a more peaceful resolution would have been possible. One should always take care when second-guessing historical figures with the benefit of hindsight. Here in the present, there will never truly be a way for you to know how you might have acted if you had lived in the past. Nor can you ever be certain how history will remember you.